And my father, at age 14, David, wanted to go to a trade school, but asked his father if he could go, promised him he would respect the Sabbath and he would do everything. But his father refused. His father wanted him to go to a yeshiva. And so my father quit school, went off to work. So he went off to work at age 14 and became a textile worker, and as did his two older brothers, also worked in textile factories. But factories, of course, it's a relative term. Some of them probably looked like what factory would look like, and others were more like sweatshops in somebody's house. And my dad, the union at that time was a very militant union, the Textile Workers Union. So of course my father got caught up in politics, and very left-wing politics, and after a series of things, eventually joined the Bund with a group. And my father was very much influenced at the time by Isaac Deutscher, who was a very well-known theoretician and leader, and ended up joining the Bund in a very thought-out way. But in his very young years, because he had been what was perceived to be a communist, this came back to haunt him later on. Not a communist, but he was never really a Trotskyist, but the communists branded him a Trotskyist, which was the worst thing you would be in the Soviet Union. So if I skip forward just for a moment to say that during the Second World War, this label, which was attached to my father, put him at great risk. It was enough that Bundists were already on a hit list for for communists. Trotskyists were even more so. So my father spent the whole war with a pseudonym, which was to protect him not from the Germans, but from the Soviets. And he always said, you know, the Germans, it wasn't personal. They wanted to kill all the Jews, but with the Russians, they had my name on a list. And so it was very, well, sad isn't the right word. It was just incredibly ironic and ridiculous, of course. He wasn't the only one, but it was something that affected him. And that name, Cusco, which was my father's pseudonym during the war, my mother put on his gravestone because it's the name that saved him. You know. So back to the beginning, my father, so in those days, between the unions and the political parties, there was a huge political and general education that they gave to their members, and which is very different than what they found here. It's interesting because, you know, immigrants come to America and there's a perception of what do they know? They're Hicks, they're, you know, they're Grine, man darf sie auslernen. But in fact, they found the unions here woefully behind, you know, the unions that they had known in Warsaw. And Warsaw was no Hicksville. Warsaw was a big city and a very sophisticated city. So he grew up in that context of living at home, bringing his pay home to his mother, but for many years not speaking with his father, even though his father never threw him out. He never disowned him. He never, you know, but his father didn't speak to him. And years later, again, I find this an interesting story about my grandfather. What he said was, probably not directly to my father, but to somebody, that his understanding of when you left religion, when you stopped believing, that you became hefka, you know, that you became amoral, that you became, you know, completely a rogue kind of person. And in observing, though, the behavior of his sons and their whole circle, he realized that these were not hefka people. They were people with great morality, with ethics, who were really working in their own way for a better world. So I find this, again, a very interesting, thoughtful person. You know, that was this grandfather that I never knew, whose name was Haskell.